My dog can be a bit of a booger sometimes, and likes nothing better than to run off into the wilderness and either come across something way bigger than him, like a deer, so I have to chase after him before he gets his royal butt kicked, or dive into the muddiest, grossest bog he can find. Seriously, this is not unusual behavior at all, yet he's so energetic. He does need plenty of exercise, and like most, he's a total sucker for attention. Since on this day, it had been fairly dry, I was hopeful that the woods that we went to play in wouldn't have any surprises that would leave him dirty and covered in filth. I let him off the leash and go wild for a bit, as I usually do. Like most modern-day people, I was busy scrolling on my phone when I heard him making this terrible whining noise. He was coming from the trees, and then I heard an equally high, awful pitch sort of scream. I ran over, as I legitimately thought it was a child screaming. At least that's what it sounded like. I was just imagining seeing my dog on the floor, and some kind of kid screaming at him. For some reason, he is scared of kids. I don't exactly know why. But when I rush in, I could see my boy cowering and whining on the ground, but there was no child. Weird, I thought. Then I hear that awful scream again, from the trees behind me. Now I'm frightened, but also, what sort of person doesn't check to see why a kid might be screaming? If they are hurt, and I just walked away. I had to check. My dog wouldn't budge. He was terrified. So, I head over to the tree myself. That's when I hear movement, and then I see something shifting in the shadows. It was definitely not a kid. I couldn't even tell you what it was, because even though it was standing there, right in front of me, my eyes didn't want to believe it. It looked like some kind of wolf, only it was as tall as me and stood firmly on two legs, like a person, and not like when my dog begs for treats. This standing upright wolf looked like just how it was meant to be, except it was gross looking, mangy, matted fur, and I could see patches of ribs through its skin. And yet, unbelievably, this thing was extremely tall. You see, despite having the face like a wolf, it was also part human. I realize that probably doesn't make sense, but how does any of this does? It was like somebody had a photo of a wolf face, and then put a photo of a human face over it, and blended them together. The most unnerving part of the whole thing was that its eyes were very much like a human. If it was pitch black, and you could only see the eyes, you would have actually thought it was a person standing there. And all of a sudden, my dog displayed an unheard act of bravery, and began growling, barking, going crazy in my defense, came off the ground and ran over to this thing, in total attack mode. It looked down at this barking, snapping dog, and let out this terrible, distorted girl scream, and seemingly vanished. It moved faster than the speed of light. One moment there, the next, it was gone. Thank God my dog didn't have another fit of bravery and began chasing after it. I'm not too sure I could have honestly coped with that, especially considering having something bad happen to my dog. I knew I never wanted to see that thing again, for as long as I lived. And just a few minutes later, once I'd gotten my wits back and was ready to head back home, I thought I could hear my dog in the trees. So I did a double take and looked down. But there he was, head cocked to one side, looking just as perplexed as me. We could both clearly hear a barking coming from the woods in the direction that thing had pelted off to, sounding just like him, but the pitch was wavering, and it sounded like it was going through an old AM radio. very off and distorted sounding. It was creepy. Whatever that thing was could somehow copy voices and sounds. Is that something it can do, to lure you into the woods, thinking you could hear something or somebody you know? Well, that was enough for the both of us. We ran back to the car and headed home. As we passed by some more wooded areas and parks, I just remembered that some of the land around here used to be on reservation before it was relocated and became major parks and woods. I had a buddy I work with whose great-grandparents lived on the original reservation around here. Could that somehow, in any way, be connected to what we saw? A few years ago, a buddy and mine were hunting when we came across something that to this very day, neither of us have been able to properly explain, and we will never forget. We hunted for the thrill, but also to put meat on the table. Deer and wild turkey, that kind of thing. And no, I'm not talking about the booze. We weren't really into trophy kills or tracking. If we saw a bear or a wolf, and one they tried to attack, we'd have no problems defending ourselves and putting it down. But ultimately, we respected larger predators. So, the day we came across a giant wolf was real and very frightening. We had been to that particular spot many times before, and my own buddy used to joke that sometimes it felt a bit spooky. We know the story of the land, that it had belonged to a Native American long before turning into several unabandoned woods. We also knew the rumors that there was a burial ground over the far end of the woods, which was marked by several large boulders. We never went there. Again, it's all about respect. I guess long ago, there used to be a large native village around here, which was connected to the burial ground. But we're talking hundreds of years ago. Scents had been leveled and taken, and who owned it, I'm not quite sure. For whatever reason, family, work, just life in general, it had been quite a few months since we'd be able to get together and head to this place. Apparently, there had been a few strange occurrences in these same woods. A park ranger had found on several occasions a deer which had been ripped apart, but no signs of any wolves or any other large predators. No signs of a cadaver being eaten on. They just concluded a wild dog must have somehow escaped and was hiding somewhere. Since we had guns, they told us to be wary. Animals hadn't been spotted, and it was very unlikely that we would come face to face with it. Well, bad luck must have been on our side that day. We'd been there maybe a couple of hours when my buddy started to get that spooky feeling again. I just put it down to what the ranger had said, and him being a bit paranoid. It was putting both of us off, though, as we'd found a couple of easy doe, but both of us missing our shots. I'd spotted a real beauty that would feed my family for quite some time, but it was closer to those boulders than we'd ever seen before. My buddy was looking like he'd seen a ghost, all wide-eyed and pale. Then he turned to me and said we gotta go. He was freaking out, and then all of a sudden, around us became cold and dark, and we heard growling. We both instantly raised our guns, and then we saw it. I'd say it was a wolf, but it was so large. It was more like a werewolf. But instead of being all-powerful, this thing looked really emaciated, skinny, and was kind of hunched over. Without any sort of hesitation, we both fired a ton of bullets. We didn't care what it was. We were so terrified. The thing that should have been filled full of holes knocked down dead within seconds, but it just stood there, taking the shots and not even flinching. We didn't even notice any bullet holes in it, as if this thing was translucent. And then, it did something even more disturbing. It casually got up from that crouching position, walking off on two legs. Not a drop of blood came from it. We didn't know what to think. We needed to get out of there. When we got back, we had casually seen the park ranger, what we had saw, trying to downplay it as to not scare him or us. He gave us a look as if he knew better, but even he couldn't admit. He nodded and said we must have seen the wild dog, and something just missed every shot. Anyway, we still don't know what that thing was, but it wasn't a regular wolf, that's for sure. Just everything about it was so wrong. I can tell you now from this experience, we're never going back out to that area, ever again. One of the most unnerving things that has ever happened to me was when I was on a family camping trip, many years ago. I was around 12 at the time, and had two younger siblings. One was only a baby, and the other less than 2. Since doing anything much with two babies in tow was pretty tough, camping seemed to be an easy option, and my parents had found a site that also had an actual summer camp attached, so there were always plenty of activities to get involved in. Since I was quite a bit older, they were happy to let me go off on my own. The baby never left my mother's side, but my not yet 2-year-old sister was a wanderer, and my dad always chasing after her. She also had this ear-piercing shriek that she found hilarious and would make for any sort of communication. One evening, I was walking back from the lodge quite later through the woods, as there had been a cookout, and my parents had given me permission as long as I was to come straight back afterwards. I'm walking back through the woods, and keep in mind, this is around 89, 88, so no cell phones or anything, and I hear this loud shriek, but it's coming from deeper in the woods, in the opposite direction of the tents. I call out. I hear another shriek, and another. I figured my little sister would be in trouble, but I couldn't see her, and I was starting to get scared. I raced back to the tent and went flying in, only to find all 4 of them all snuggled up. I told them what had happened, and of course they thought maybe another child was missing, so my dad went and reported it. Apparently, nobody was missing, which was a huge relief, but did not explain what I'd heard. The other strange thing was that my little sister was really sick in the night too. She got a really high temperature, and we had to pack up and go home early the next morning, just so my mother could take her to the doctors. But once we were on the road, she began feeling much better, and by the time we'd gotten home, she was right as rain. I will never know what I heard in those woods, or why my little sister was suddenly sick, and then suddenly fine again. But I have heard stories of creatures who can apparently mimic voices, and drain the energy, and make those they have copied very sick. I believe they're called skinwalkers. Do you know anything about them?